The sound of barking echoed through the narrow halls of the county shelter like a storm trapped indoors. Dozens of dogs barked, howled, pawed at their gates, each desperate for attention, each voice blending into a chorus of need. The air smelled of metal, bleach, and damp concrete. Somewhere near the back, a mop bucket clattered. Staff Sergeant James Walker stepped in slowly, the door shutting behind him with a muted thud. He wasn't there for a dog, not really. He was still adjusting to civilian life, his therapist suggesting volunteer work to help ground his thoughts. He didn't expect anything. Just quiet work. A few hours a week. Something steady. He walked down the line of kennels, glancing briefly at wagging tails and pleading eyes. Then he stopped. In the far corner, away from the others, sat a single German shepherd, silent. He wasn't barking. He wasn't pacing. He just watched. His fur was rough in patches. A long scar ran along the side of his flank. His left ear didn't stand up fully. He didn't move, didn't blink. James froze. The dog's body tensed, eyes fixed directly on him, sharp, searching, almost stunned. Then, after 3 years of silence, the dog let out a low, aching whine. James felt the air leave his chest. His hands trembled. What? One of the handlers, sorting bowls nearby, glanced over and frowned. That one? He never reacts to anyone, she said, approaching. Came in a few weeks ago. Found limping near the old highway. No tag, no chip. No name. James took a step closer. The dog didn't back away. His eyes stayed locked on James, wide and trembling. The soldier's lips parted, voice barely audible. Axel. The dog's ears twitched. Then, cut to black. 3 years ago, he was declared dead. Staff Sergeant James Walker had served 9 years in the Army, but nothing grounded him more than his partnership with Axel, his K-9 unit companion. Where others saw a working dog, James saw his shadow, his anchor, his last line of defense. Axel wasn't just trained, he was loyal, intuitive, and fiercely intelligent. He responded to every hand signal, every whisper. He didn't need commands to know what James needed. They moved together like a single thought split into 2 bodies. From IED sweeps to base security, they'd been through it all. Axel had saved lives, dozens. Found hidden explosives others missed. Pulled James out of danger more than once. And on the rare quiet nights, Axel would lay by his bunk, ears flicking to every sound while James slept. But then came that one mission. It was supposed to be routine, a convoy clearance through a narrow pass. Axel led the way, nose low to the ground, body tense with focus. James followed closely, scanning the road with practiced eyes. And then, boom! The world exploded in a flash of dirt, fire, and steel. James remembered the sound of his own scream, muffled, distant, swallowed by the wind. His ears rang like shattered bells. He opened his eyes to smoke, dust, and silence. His left leg burned. Blood pooled beneath him. Axel, he croaked, voice hoarse. Nothing. He crawled forward through the debris, calling again, heart pounding, vision tunneling. And then darkness. When he woke up in a field hospital 3 days later, bandaged and broken, a commanding officer stood beside his bed. You're lucky to be alive, they said flatly. James tried to sit up. Where's Axel? There was a pause. I'm sorry, the officer said. He didn't make it. The words hit harder than the blast. They gave him no details. Nobody. Just a single sentence that buried more than a partner. They buried James Walker's heart with it. If you've ever believed that real loyalty never dies, that a bond built in silence, sacrifice, and survival can outlast even the harshest fate, then this story is for you. What you're about to witness isn't just a reunion, it's a miracle years in the making. It's about a dog who never forgot his partner, and a soldier who thought he'd lost everything. If loyalty, love, and reunion stories hit you in the heart, please tap that like button, it helps this story reach others who need it. and drop a comment below with the city or country you're watching from. Because somewhere out there, someone else is holding on to hope. And this is proof that hope isn't foolish. It's real. After the army, James Walker drifted. He had the medals, the discharge papers, the formal "thank you for your service." But what he didn't have was direction. Civilian life felt loud in all the wrong ways, meaningless chatter, empty obligations. He missed the order of the field, the silence between commands, the presence of someone who understood him without words. A friend at the VA recommended volunteering. "There's a K9 rehab program out on Ridgefield," they said. "For retired dogs. Misfits, mostly. Some of them don't make it. But they still deserve care." James agreed, if only because it sounded like a place where no one would expect him to talk too much. It was on his third day, walking the kennels, filling water bowls, cleaning bedding, that it happened. Most of the dogs barked as he passed. A few wagged tails. One growled. James moved quietly, efficiently. No interaction lasted more than a few seconds. Until he saw him. At the far end of the shelter, in a shaded corner, lay a German shepherd, larger than most, scarred along the ribcage, fur rough around the edges. He didn't move. Didn't bark. Just watched. James paused. The dog sat up slowly. His ears perked, not fully upright, one drooped, and his tail stayed low, but steady. His eyes locked onto James, wide and unblinking. A nearby handler, noticing James's pause, stepped closer. "That one came in 3 weeks ago. Stray. We found him limping near a mile marker off Highway 6. No chip, no tag. I don't like people. Won't eat unless we leave the food and walk away." James didn't respond. He stared at the dog. Something in those eyes, deep brown, full of weight, pulled at him like gravity. His heartbeat ticked faster. The dog took a step forward. Small. Measured. Intentional. James crouched slowly, heart pounding. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Axel?" The dog froze. One breath. Then another. And then, another step forward. No growl. No fear. Just recognition. The handler's voice dropped to a whisper. "He's never done that before." James couldn't speak. He couldn't even blink. Because somewhere, underneath the scars and time and silence, he saw him. Axel. The shelter staff didn't believe him at first. They were kind, careful with their words, but behind every look was the same quiet doubt. "Lots of dogs react to trauma in strange ways," one of them said gently. "It could just be a coincidence." But James stood firm, eyes never leaving the German shepherd resting quietly outside the office window. "No," he said. "He remembers me. I'm not confused." The staff lead, Melissa, sighed. "Even if you're right, without paperwork or a chip, there's no way to confirm it, unless..." She trailed off. "Unless?" James pressed. "Unless we run a DNA test and compare it to any sample records the Army still has on file." James nodded without hesitation. "Do it." It took a few calls. A few favors. A former commanding officer still in contact with James pulled strings to get Axel's archived bloodwork released from a military K9 database. Swabs were taken. Samples shipped overnight. 2 weeks later, the results came in. Positive match. 99.98%. The staff stared at the paper in stunned silence. "It's him," Melissa whispered. James didn't react right away. He just took the paper, stared at the printout, and slowly sat down. Outside the window, Axel stood up. Tail still. Ears tilted forward. Watching. Waiting. No more doubt. No more theories. It was him. Against all odds, Axel was home. The truth was undeniable now, on paper, in the stillness of Axel's eyes, in the way he tracked James with quiet focus. But recognition wasn't the same as recovery. Axel had changed. The once fearless, high-performing K9 now flinched at closing doors and trembled when a car engine backfired. Loud voices made him retreat. Fast movements made him freeze. James saw the signs instantly: PTSD, the same invisible scars that had followed him home too. But he didn't push. Instead, he visited the shelter every day. Same time. Same pace. Same tone. He brought familiar objects: a tennis ball, an old worn tug rope, a whistle from their deployment days. He never threw the ball, just rolled it gently. He never gave orders, just offered familiar words: sit, stay, easy, boy. At first, Axel didn't move. But then, one afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the trees and golden light spilled into the pen, James knelt down and whispered, "Sit." Axel looked at him. Really looked. And then, he sat. A day later, it was stay. Then, shake. Slowly, carefully, Axel lifted one paw and placed it in James's hand. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't obedience. It was trust, rebuilding itself one brick at a time. James blinked fast, overwhelmed. His hand didn't shake, but his breath did. He swallowed hard and pressed his forehead to Axel's. "You remember," he whispered. Axel didn't move. But then, as if a signal passed between them, the dog leaned forward and rested his massive head against James's chest. No bark. No tail wag. Just stillness. Solid. Present. Real. James wrapped both arms around him and let his eyes close for the first time in 3 years without fear. For a soldier who thought he'd buried his partner. And for a dog who had survived what no one else could. This was the beginning of something neither of them thought they'd ever get back. Peace. For a while, James let himself exist in the moment, just him and Axel, relearning each other. But the deeper the trust returned, the louder the questions grew. How had Axel survived? Where had he been all this time? The last thing James remembered was the explosion, then waking up to a commanding officer telling him Axel didn't make it. No body, no burial, just a cold, one-line statement. Now, 3 years later, that lie echoed like a thunderclap. He filed a formal request to reopen the mission's final report. The response came swiftly: classified. Access denied. Sections were redacted, entire paragraphs blacked out like someone had swept the truth under a rug. Frustrated, James reached out to an old teammate, Mike Daniels, the unit's comms tech, now a civilian contractor. Mike agreed to meet for coffee and slid into the booth with a worn expression. "Man. I heard something happened. Is it true?" James nodded. "It's him. Axel's alive." Mike rubbed his jaw, eyes darkening. "We always wondered." "What do you mean?" Mike glanced around, voice dropping. "There was never a body, James. After the dust settled, we only found blood in Axel's tracking vest. I remember one of the local guides saying they saw a dog limping away from the wreckage. Some civilians tried to help, I think. But no one followed up. You were medevaced out. Everything went quiet." James stared at him, tension building in his gut. "So someone took him?" Mike nodded slowly. "I don't think it was official. But yeah. Somebody pulled him from that site." James looked down at his coffee, heart pounding. Axel hadn't just survived, he'd been taken. And now, James needed to know who, and why. Pain. That was the first thing Axel remembered. A sharp, searing bolt in his hind leg and the heavy weight of rubble pressing on his side. His ears rang with high-pitched static. The scent of smoke, scorched earth, and blood filled his nostrils. He tried to move, but his muscles screamed. His training told him to stay still, stay quiet. Assess. Survive. He lifted his head slowly. The battlefield was chaos, dust in the air, bodies scattered, fire crackling. But no James. No voice calling him back. Just the distant sound of shouting in a language he didn't understand and heavy boots approaching. Axel let out a weak, guttural whine. A shadow loomed over him. Two figures, one in desert gear, the other speaking rapidly into a radio. The man knelt, eyes scanning Axel's side, then nodded. A crude field wrap was tied around the dog's torso. He was lifted onto a makeshift stretcher, dragged into a truck. No collar. No chip. No record. That night, the truck drove hours past checkpoints. No medics. No American flag. Just cold hands and unfamiliar words. He was taken to a warehouse, dimly lit, foul-smelling, filled with cages. Other dogs barked, whimpered, growled. Some were injured. Most were silent. Over the next months, Axel was poked, prodded, yelled at. He was reconditioned with shock sticks and chain leads. Any sign of resistance was met with punishment. The trainers didn't speak gently. They didn't earn trust. They forced obedience. He learned new commands. Shorter, crueler. Not find, but bite. Not stay, but attack. His eyes dulled, his spirit thinned. But deep down, in a place they couldn't reach, he remembered. The tone of a steady voice. The feel of a hand on his chest. A scent that meant safety. James. And then came the chaos. Gunfire one night. A raid. Screams. Lights flashing. A door left open. Axel ran. Through mud, through wire, over dirt roads and under fences. He limped through towns, stole food from trash, curled up under broken signs. He was a ghost. A stray. A shell of who he once was. He wandered for nearly a year. No collar. No name. But his mind clung to fragments, the way a voice once called him partner, the smell of soap and sweat on a uniform, the sound of a whistle from 1,000 yards away. Then, one morning, he collapsed near a highway. Animal control found him dehydrated, limping, with old scars and haunted eyes. They brought him to a shelter with cement floors and metal bars. And there, day after day, he waited. Quiet. Watching. Searching faces. Until the door opened. And that scent returned. That voice. James. And in that instant, through every scar, every nightmare, and every lost command, Axel remembered who he was. And who he belonged to. James didn't want to believe it, but the deeper he dug, the more truth surfaced in fragments he couldn't ignore. Axel hadn't just been forgotten. He'd been erased. He drove 3 hours to the military base where it all began, where the mission briefing had been given, where the decisions were made after the blast. The receptionist recognized his name instantly and sent him to a quiet office on the 2nd floor. There sat Colonel Rains, his former commanding officer. Older now, gray overtaking his once jet-black hair, but still sharp, still guarded. He motioned for James to sit. "You didn't have to come all this way," the colonel said, folding his hands on the desk. "I need answers," James replied. "About Axel. About the report." Rain sighed, long and heavy. "We did what we thought was necessary." "No, you did what was convenient," James snapped. "You filed him as Kia. You never even looked." There was a pause. Then, quietly, "We found blood, debris, his vest. Nobody. It was chaos. No one wanted to admit we lost a dog and a handler in the same hour. But I survived," James said. "And he did too," Rains admitted. But by the time anyone saw that civilian report about a wounded dog being pulled out, it was days later. And by then, he trailed off, ashamed. "You buried his ID," James said bitterly. "We scrubbed it from the system. Said it was protocol. Truth is," the colonel looked up, eyes hollow, "we didn't expect anyone to care this long." James stood, hands clenched. "I cared. And now, everyone would. Because Axel had lived. And so would the truth." The town fairgrounds were alive with noise, cheers, laughter, and barking. It was the annual K9 Service Appreciation event, honoring dogs who had served in military and police forces. Booths lined the park with flags, banners, and photos of brave handlers and their partners. Children held cotton candy and watched agility demonstrations. Retired K9s sat calmly beside their handlers, soaking in the sun and attention. James stood near the memorial tent, Axel at his side, calm but alert. His fur had started to shine again. The haunted look had faded, but his body was still wired, always listening. The crowd gave him space, a sign read Combat K9, retired, do not touch. James smiled politely at those who asked questions and quietly declined interviews. Then, without warning, Axel froze. His ears stiffened. The tail went rigid. James noticed immediately. Easy, he said, placing a calming hand on Axel's back. But it didn't help. Axel let out a deep, guttural growl. His eyes locked on a man across the clearing. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, wearing dark sunglasses and a crisp polo shirt. Nothing about him screamed threat, but to Axel, it wasn't about what he wore. It had a scent. Posture. History. Before James could react, Axel lunged forward, pulling hard on the lead, snarling. The crowd scattered, startled by the sudden aggression. Whoa, Axel! Heel! James planted his feet, yanking the lead back with both hands. Axel resisted, teeth bared, hackles high, but he didn't bite. He didn't need to. He was issuing a warning. The man stopped cold, eyes wide. Then, recognizing the attention, he turned quickly and disappeared into the crowd. James stood there, stunned, still gripping the leash. Axel stood beside him now, panting hard, still tense. His eyes hadn't left the spot where the man had stood. James's mind raced. That face. Something familiar. Not from the army, from the black site photographs he'd seen when digging through Axel's post-mission history. A handler from a private firm. One of the men rumored to be involved in underground K9 trafficking. James pulled out his phone and snapped the man's retreating back. Later that night, he submitted the photo along with a full report to a military investigator who had been helping him behind the scenes. "Are you sure?" they asked. "I'm not," James said. "But Axel is." And that's enough to start asking questions. By morning, an official investigation was opened. And the past was no longer silent. James didn't want revenge, he wanted the truth. And the world deserved to hear it. After the incident at the K9 appreciation event, the photo of the mysterious man and Axel's violent reaction sparked something deep in James. He reached out to Rachel Myers, a former military correspondent turned investigative journalist. She had written stories before about unregistered military dogs and the murky transition between official service and private security. Rachel met James in a quiet coffee shop with a recorder, a notepad, and wide, serious eyes. "Do you have evidence?" she asked. "I have enough," James replied. "And Axel has the rest." They spent weeks piecing it all together, mission records, redacted files, the DNA results, Axel's disappearance, the private firm connection, and most damning of all, official silence. When the story dropped, the headline hit like a bomb. K9 declared dead reunites with handler, then uncovers a military cover-up. Axel's photo, before and after, ran on national news. The image of him resting his head against James's chest became a symbol. Social media erupted. Former handlers stepped forward with similar stories: lost dogs, incomplete records, unexplained deaths. The public demanded answers. Within a week, Congress requested a hearing. Military spokespeople issued a statement. "We deeply regret the oversight involving K9 Axel. Our K9 units are heroes, and what happened in this case should never happen again." But James wasn't finished. He stood before cameras, Axel seated stoically by his side. "I don't want sympathy," he said. "I want accountability. K9s aren't equipment. They're soldiers. And they don't just disappear." The pressure worked. Within 2 months, the Military K-9 Accountability Act was passed. The law required all service dogs are microchipped and tracked until natural death. Full transparency on discharge status. Handlers were notified and offered the first right of adoption. Axel's story became part of K-9 unit training across the country. His scarred but loyal face was printed on awareness posters and military base bulletins. A bronze statue was even commissioned outside the largest K-9 training center, captioned, "He came home. So should they all." And for the first time in 3 years, James felt something rare. Not closure, but justice. And justice, finally, barked back. The house sat on 5 acres at the edge of nowhere, just trees, sky, and stillness. No traffic. No gunshots. No deadlines. Just peace. James had bought it with his savings, a fixer-upper, a place where silence wasn't heavy, just natural. He replaced the broken fence, rebuilt the porch, and carved out a small path to the woods behind it. Every night, as the sun dipped low, he and Axel would sit there, side by side, listening to the wind rustle the leaves and the crickets warming up for their night song. Axel had settled in faster than James expected. The nightmares came less. The flinching stopped. He moved with calm confidence again, tail low and relaxed, eyes alert but no longer haunted. That evening, the sky blushed orange and gold. James sat on the steps, legs stretched out, a beer in one hand, the other resting on Axel's back. The dog exhaled deeply and leaned his head against James's knee. A perfect stillness wrapped around them. "You came back to me," James whispered, eyes glassy. Axel didn't move, didn't react. He just stayed there, eyes half closed, breathing slow and steady. His scars were still there. So were James's. But the world felt softer now, like maybe, just maybe, some things broken could still find their way whole again. A breeze rolled through the trees. James smiled. And Axel, for the first time in 3 years, slept peacefully, his chest rising and falling in sync with the man beside him. No war. No command. Just home. The mailbox creaked as James opened it, expecting bills or junk like every other morning. But nestled between a power company flyer and a folded newspaper was a plain, unmarked envelope, no return address, just his name printed in block letters. Back on the porch, with Axel lying at his feet, James opened it slowly. Inside were photos, 5 of them. Each showed a different German Shepherd or Belgian Malinois, each marked with military tags. But none of them had closure dates. Instead, stamped beside every photo in faded ink were the words, "Missing, no remains found." He flipped to the final page, a typed note on crisp white paper. "Your dog wasn't the only one." James stared at the letter, heart pounding, breath held. Just then, Axel lifted his head sharply, ears twitching. His body stiffened. A low, familiar growl rumbled in his throat as he stared toward the front door. James followed his gaze. The camera slowly panned from Axel's still form to the untouched door, the wind rattling the screen just enough to make the viewer lean in. Fade to black. This was just the beginning.